Talking Heads really does start to explore the way in which we can address some of the functional issues we have working with young people. So we really need them to be anonymised. We quite often have to work in environments where there isn't, say, Wi-Fi access. We need to use pretty accessible technology, so the kind of technologies that are available on most people's phones or MP3 devices or tablets and so on. And to deploy those in a way that allows a creative process and a communication process to take place that, very importantly, plugs into decision makers, allows them to communicate in a way that their ideas, their visions, their opinions can be utilised in the process of a plan.
We needed something that was novelty but had a purpose. So it's a very fine line between balancing keeping someone engaged and entertained and amused, but with what they're producing, for it to be useful in some way to us.
Being the first person in the room to stick your hand up and having to say, this is what I feel and this is what I think, which is what we're asking people to do. They're quite personal things that you're kind of just becoming very self-aware about what other people might think of you and what you're saying, whereas this takes that away. As well as getting over that whole thing of, well, are we allowed to film children nowadays? Can we take their photograph? Are we allowed to identify who they are? And the thing that is holding people back from just going, hi, what can we do to assist you?
For children and especially teenagers, they really don't like to express their emotions. They find it embarrassing. They probably also would say what their friends want to hear. And talking about emotions is basically a no-no, how they feel about something.
There was Morpho, which is a brilliant app which you can fully animate a picture, a photograph of yourself. You can draw a picture and animate that one. You can take a picture of any object and give it eyes, a mouth, smile, emotion, and then once you animate it, it's your voice, which you can again alter, so it's completely anonymous. Which is fantastic for being able to have your opinion and share it.
It's also a slightly more ethical way to get ideas from younger people, because if you're asking people directly about their lives, issues in their community, their problems, then that's actually sort of quite intrusive in a way, and especially with younger people, it's good to find solutions to that. So people like psychologists, if they're talking to young people about problems, they'll often use an agent, a doll or an object to talk to them about. So this idea of using characters as an agent in the design process seemed a rational or logical one.
It made them laugh, it made them giggle, they loved the fact that they could make a building talk, but ultimately they gave the building something to say. They understood the purpose of why that building wouldn't be happy if it was torn down, or why it was a treasure, and they could say from the building's point of view, if you can give anything, which it allowed you to give a building a personality, and they could describe why they needed that building to stay in that town, or equally why it needed to be destroyed or ripped down.
The Talking Heads process can allow us to explore topical areas that a community might want to address. So, in a survey, ordinarily, the people designing a survey would say, okay, we want to understand something about policing, or we want to understand something about recreation, health, a whole range of things. And of course, they could be characterised to drive a young person to animate and perceive the thinking that's required around that particular that character. So, for example, if you provide a young person with a policeman to characterise or adopt a role play with, they then would hopefully start to think about areas to do with crime or speeding or something along those lines, which of course is stepping them right out of their normal perception as an individual and thinking about things from somebody else's point of view.
And in the same instance, if you gave them a worksheet and said, you're this character, with a picture of the character, write about how you'd feel about this. Now you're this, write about how you'd feel about that. It becomes dull very quickly. Whereas if you're playing constantly and you've got something to fiddle with and it's saying funny noises, and with the Morpho app it can roll their eyes, laugh, smile, you can add a bunch of different emotions to it. And it's that level of interaction that really sparks their imagination and holds their interest for a long time.
The Talking Heads process, when we combined it with aging apps, so effectively you take a picture of yourself, you age yourself, and then you reanimate that picture as if you were in your 70s, 80s, 90s, something like that, has proven to be really successful with young people. And I think what's really good about that is it indicated on some occasions that young people could actually change their whole perception or certainly their opinions about a particular topic, and actually start to redress them, having gone through the role play of being an older person. So we experienced how young people had quite an entrenched or particular view about a topic, that when they were aged and reanimated themselves, that process of role play enabled them to actually come to terms with a different point of view. And some young people actually presented animations of themselves almost contradicting the opinion they had at the beginning of the day. And that's really quite an interesting process.
What they think of their town as if they were in a family, or if they were just a bit older, or if they were in a certain profession, what might a police officer think of that town? It allowed them to put themselves into someone else's shoes and do that.
By using Morpho and the apps, by putting themselves into someone else's shoes, about looking either as an older person at their community now, or them older looking back at their community and what their community might look at, is they start to have a different perspective on it. Is they start to not just think about, well, I want a skate park, but they start going, oh, okay, so if I'm 70 now, I'm not going to be on my skateboard as often, so therefore I might want something else. I might want somewhere where I can sit and meet and talk with other people.
Once you can understand a problem from someone else's point of view, again, the Morpho lends itself to thinking of an idea from someone else's point of view, which in turn brings about empathy and also a different imagination, a different creation format which you go through, because you are no longer thinking how you'd solve the problem, you are taking on board how someone else would solve it as well, or what they might want from it.
Think about things that in the future in a way that is more contemplative, more reflective. So a young person then might suddenly be thinking about housing or the provision of health or services, and something which is very, very difficult to get them to empathise with outside the process of role play.
The things that surprised me was how quickly quite grown-up opinions were coming through. Things like access to hospitals, access to medical advice. That came through when we were doing the primary school consultations about capacity and waiting lists within NHS. And they're 11, 12.
The kids were playing around and jumping around, but at the end of the day, we were able to get some views from them.
It's about making it easy to say these messages, but it's also about making them easy to receive as well.
They were having fun, but behind that, you could still see that the message was, they were carrying the message across.
And also because whatever's produced, you have no idea that that's come from a 9-year-old or a 98-year-old. In theory, you could put it across everybody within the community. Okay, this was developed for young people, but a lot of the stuff that's involved with it, you can use with an older age group, and suddenly everybody is on a level pegging. And just by going through it, you'll suddenly find that you can't pick and choose, well, that came from one of the nice young children from down the road, that came from one of the snotty ones other side of town, and that came from one of the old dits, because everybody's on an equal par. Everybody's got kind of a certain character that they've gone part of, they've been able to express an opinion in a different way, and it's anonymous.